Six Flags Discovery Kingdom in Vallejo, California is Northern California's best park for roller coasters, but I don't think it's Northern California's best overall park. This park has its pros and cons, but ultimately has some big flaws. With that said, I really believe that Discovery Kingdom is very close to being a really good amusement park. They just have a couple of things to clean up and improve, and at that point they could become a go-to destination in California. One of the main unique things about Six Flags Discovery Kingdom is that it is both a roller coaster and animal park. This goes back to the park's origins. In 1968, Marine World opened in Redwood City, California. In 1972, this park merged with a failing animal park called Africa USA, and so for a short time it was known as Marine World Africa USA. In 1986, the park moved north about 2 hours to Vallejo, California, where it has been operating ever since. At this point, the park was solely about the animals, but in 1996, the park was purchased by Premier Parks. In 1999, after Premier Parks acquired Six Flags, Marine World was renamed to Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. In the 21st century, this park has slowly gotten further and further away from animal exhibits and more into rides and roller coasters. So at this point, it leads to kind of an odd balance. You have most of your roller coasters in the front of the park, along with some of the other thrill rides, and then most of the animals are located in the back of the park. There are some animals closer to the front, and there are some rides closer to the back, but generally speaking, this is the case. I do feel as if that Discovery Kingdom has a little bit of an identity crisis. At this point, I think park officials need to answer the question, are they a ride park or are they an animal park? I think the animals are great, and there are some great exhibits that we'll talk about later in this review, but I do wish that they took more advantage of the animal theme and themed more attractions and more areas to animals. To be fair, there are a few, like Sidewinder Safari, Cobra, and a few of their kids' rides. I just think that this is, at the end of the day, a missed opportunity that Six Flags could be doing a lot better with, but I digress. Let's talk about when you go to visit this park. Tickets are on average $40 to $70. This varies and it depends on the day and season that you're going. For example, a Saturday in the summer is going to be more expensive than a Wednesday in the spring. They do have some seasonal events as well. These include Fright Fest around Halloween time and Holiday in the Park to end out the calendar year. I have not visited Fright Fest, but I've heard that they have some good haunts and other attractions to check out. Holiday in the Park I just experienced for the first time this year, and there are some cool lights scattered around the park. A couple warnings about these seasonal events though. Number 1, Fright Fest seems to be the busiest time of year. And then number 2, for Holiday in the Park, I would not recommend visiting the week after Christmas. I have not gone during this time to Discovery Kingdom, but I did go to Great America's Winterfest during this period of time, and it was incredibly busy. The employees at that park told me that this was their busiest week of the year, so I'm just guessing that Discovery Kingdom experiences similar crowd levels during this period of time. When you arrive at Discovery Kingdom, you are greeted with a great view of all of the awesome roller coasters that you can find at the front of the park. This is one of the best skylines for a park that I've seen, partly because the roller coasters are all so close together there at the front. Now, in order to get to the front entrance, you'll have to do two things. 1, pay an obnoxious parking fee, which I believe is $35, and 2, you have to walk a long way to get to the front entrance. If you walk, it'll take at least 15 to 20 minutes to get from the parking lot to the front entrance. That depends on how crowded the pathway is, and it depends on how far back in the parking lot you parked. Now, they do have transportation available. In past visits, I've seen them use trams. In our 2024 visits, I've seen them use buses. You have to catch these at the right time though. If you have to wait for the bus to fill up, it might just be faster to walk. Also, a line for these can build up at the beginning of the day and at the end of the night, so be aware of that if you plan on using this as your main mode of transportation from your car to the front entrance and back. Once you pass under the Flash Vertical Velocity roller coaster and go inside, you're greeted with a pretty decent entry area. The centerpiece of this is a fountain with dolphins in it as well, and I think it looks really nice. If you go to the left, you can eventually find the DC Universe section of the park. If you go straight down the middle, you can get to rides like Sidewinder Safari and Boomerang, along with most of the animal exhibits, and if you go to the right, you can find rides like Medusa and Con. One last note before we talk about the ride lineup is my recommended touring plan for Discovery Kingdom. Firstly, I would advise getting to this park at or before opening. Then from there, I would first head to the DC Universe section of the park. In a perfect world, Joker would be your first ride, but that ride seems to never open on time, so if that is indeed the case, then go ahead and hit up Superman first. After you ride Superman, if Joker's open, then I would recommend getting on that ride because it gets super busy, and then you can hit up Batman because it's nearby. Then, if Wonder Woman Lasso of Truth is a priority to you, this would be a good time to ride this. This can get pretty busy on busier days. You can now make your way out of DC Universe, and if Flash Vertical Velocity is for some reason operational, which is incredibly rare, then you can give that a ride too on your way out. From here, I'd recommend going to the back of the park and riding Sidewinder Safari. This ride has a low throughput, and so the line can build up pretty quickly. With all that being said, let's talk about the attraction lineup in a bit more depth. The star here from a roller coaster standpoint is no doubt the RMC Hybrid Joker. This is seen as one of the weaker RMC Hybrid coasters, and of the ones I've ridden, it is my least favorite, but just because they're all so good. This coaster does have multiple spots of airtime, though it's not nearly as powerful as some of the company's other creations. The quantity though definitely makes up for it. There is a lot of opportunities to come out of your seat on this ride. I mean this both in terms of airtime and hang time. Both of the coaster's latter two inversions are really good. The 0G stall is great, but my favorite moment on the ride is the barrel roll at the very end. It's super floaty, and it's a terrific way to end the park's best roller coaster, and in my opinion, it's not even that close. Right next door is Superman Ultimate Flight, the original Premier Rides Skyrocket 2. This is a very compact shuttle coaster from Premier Rides, featuring some great launches, some great moments of airtime, and another excellent moment of hang time. Discovery Kingdom is really full of great hang time moments. That slow motion inversion really makes you hang out of your seat, and then the non-inverting loop and the journey back through the station is fun as well. This is a buttersmooth roller coaster. Of course, you wouldn't have to worry about headbanging anyway, because this is an over-the-shoulder restraint-free roller coaster. The ride just features lap bars. Because of this, you really feel the forces that Superman has up its sleeve, and it's a disorienting experience, but a good one. Batman the Ride is your off-the-shelf SNS 4D free spin, yes, but these can still be really enjoyable. It all depends on how much you flip, and this is completely different on every ride experience. Sometimes you won't even get one full flip, and other times you'll get 3 or 4 full flips. At its best, this ride is pretty wild. At its worst, it's pretty forgettable. Now, I will talk about Flash Vertical Velocity, even though this ride has been SB&O for a while, and I'm not sure if it will ever reopen. If by some miracle you find this coaster operational, give it a ride because it's a really fun experience. The launches have decent power, and the near spike gives a great feeling of weightlessness, and if you sit in the front you get a great view. The far spike gives some more epic hang time. I think the best seat overall on this coaster is the front because you get the superior view on the near spike and a superior hang time on the far spike. Let's flip over to the other side of the park now for the park's second best roller coaster, and that is Medusa, a really good B&M floorless coaster. Yes, do you remember the days when Six Flags was still investing in big custom B&M coasters in the late 90s and early 2000s? Well, I don't because I wasn't alive, but I've heard about it. This was a great addition to Discovery Kingdom. It's been closed for part of this year to get a new paint job. I assume that's to make it look nice and fresh for its 25th anniversary in 2025. As you can see, it's looking a lot better now. But for the ride itself, this is your longest, tallest, and fastest coaster that you're going to find at Discovery Kingdom. Almost 4,000 feet of track, a height of 150 feet, which is the maximum height allowed in Vallejo, and a top speed of 65 miles an hour with a whopping 7 inversions. This model isn't my personal favorite, but Medusa really shows what this model can be at its best. It's mostly floaty outside of the 0G roll. And even on the doorstep of year 25, smoothness is not really a problem for this coaster. It's still running very well, and it's still one of the best coasters at Discovery Kingdom. This and Joker are the two main coasters that have original layouts, so they stand out in that regard. Alright, let's talk about some really bad thrill coasters now. Let's start with the better of the two, in my opinion, Con, the Vekoma SLC. On paper, this ride looks like it should be pretty good. It's got 5 inversions, it's got a pretty dynamic course, and good pacing. But the moment you get on the ride, you start to realize that you're in for something painful. The transitions on this ride aren't particularly smooth, and you will likely bang your head multiple times during the experience. It also just doesn't track very well as a general rule. If you ride up front, it's not awful, but I imagine the further you go back into train, the worse and worse that this ride gets. So consider yourself warned. I think that in the future, they ought to remove this ride along with their Vekoma Boomerang, promptly named Boomerang. Well, technically Boomerang Coast to Coaster, but close enough. This is another old Vekoma that is not running well at all. This ride suffers from some of the same problems that Con does: uncomfortable restraints, uncomfortable transitions, and overall poor tracking. But I think in some areas, this ride is admittedly worse than Con. Pairing intensity, which this ride does have, with a rough ride experience usually doesn't lead to good things, so consider yourself warned about both Boomerang and Con. Moving on from the thrill coasters, let's step down to the family coasters. Sidewinder Safari is the newest addition to the park as of 2022. This is, unfortunately, another off-the-shelf model, this time a Zamperla spinning Wild Mouse. This coaster is similar to Batman the Ride in the sense that the more it spins, the better, and you're never going to get an identical ride experience. There are some times where you might barely spin, and other times where you spin a ton. I think the main thing is the weight and how it's distributed. A full car is better than a half full car, and a car with weight unequally distributed from one side to the other usually results in more spinning. If you put the heaviest person in your party on the edge of one side and the lightest person in your party on the edge of the other side, you're more likely to spin. All you're doing is trying to make the weight a little lopsided, and my personal opinion is that the more you spin on this coaster, the better. Overall, it's a pretty good family coaster. Cobra is a Tivoli coaster from Zier, known for its outlandishly long trains. Outside of that, and being my first ever roller coaster, this ride isn't too notable. It is a nice coaster for kids, but watch your hands on this one, there are some questionable clearances. Even still, this ride will always hold a special place in my heart. The final coaster that Discovery Kingdom has is their smallest, Roadrunner Express. The last time I rode this many years ago, it was on the jerky side, and I didn't particularly enjoy it, but maybe the young kids don't really have a problem with that. Outside of the roller coasters, this park has a couple notable flat rides, most notably Wonder Woman Lasso of Truth. This Zamperla Giant Discovery is a pretty wild experience. It's actually the park's fastest ride, topping out at 73 miles an hour. The first and last ferret are pretty tame, but that middle ferret has some wild max swings. You get some wonderful hang time mixed with air time, and then each downswing has some pretty great positive Gs. I'm not huge into flat rides, but for flat ride standards, this is pretty good. The park's other notable flat ride is Sky Screamer, a 150-foot tall swing ride. This provides decent views of the rides around you, namely Joker and Medusa, but because it's not even over 200 feet, you don't get crazy views to the rest of the park. Still, the views are good enough that I recommend giving it a ride if the line isn't too long. Outside of these two flats though, they really have nothing too notable. A scrambler, a swinging ship, a wave swinger, bumper cars, you get the idea. One ride this park could use in my opinion is a drop tower. Now I alluded to earlier that Vallejo has a 150-foot height limit, so they couldn't build something too crazy like a 300-footer, but they could build one from S&S or Larson that fits in that height limit and it would still be a great addition to the park. Moving on to water rides, you have two, the first of which is Monsoon Falls, which is your typical shoot the chutes attraction. Lift hill, turn, drop, big splash, turn back into the station. Pretty simple, but always a good time. The second and final water ride is Wild Water Safari. This is a rapids ride, and I'm sure there's a potential that you get absolutely soaked. It's been many years since I've ridden it personally, but from an off-ride standpoint, it looks to be pretty nicely landscaped, and on a hot day, it might be worth a go. Discovery Kingdom has a few major ride gaps. No wooden coaster, no drop tower, but no dark ride is really important. I don't think it's likely, but it would be really cool if Six Flags worked with Sally Dark Rides as they've done in the past to make a dark ride for Discovery Kingdom. It could be DC themed like the Justice League Battle for Metropolis rides, or maybe they could theme it to animals. That'd be cool. Speaking of which, that's a good segue into this park's wild card, and that is all the animal attractions. As mentioned earlier, this park has significantly less animals than it once did. Of course, it was just animals at one point, but there's still a good collection. My personal favorite is the Shark Experience. Guests enter a tunnel surrounded by water, fish, and of course, sharks. Then when you exit this tunnel, you get arguably an even better view from the other side. Other highlights include a lion, a tiger, giraffes, cheetahs, and butterflies. You can find the best cluster of animals in the back right corner of the park, behind one of their kids areas. This area is loosely themed to animals and the jungle. Their other kids area is of course themed to Looney Tunes. Between these two areas and all the animals in between, there is plenty of things to do for the whole family at Discovery Kingdom. Alright, let's talk about food for a minute. Food is one of the areas that this park really struggles in my opinion. They've had some decent options in the past, including Panda Express and a place called Macho Nacho, but both of those places have since been removed. Now, you're hard pressed to find a good meal at Discovery Kingdom, and that's unfortunate. That being said, the funnel cakes look pretty good. You can find these at the front of the park. I didn't have any, but my family members that did really enjoyed it. A few other notes before touching on some final ways that Discovery Kingdom could improve. Merchandise at this park is overall decent. There are plenty of places to spend your money if you feel so inclined, and there is some park-specific merchandise at the front of the park. But understandably, most of what you'll find here is themed around Looney Tunes or DC. A note to those of strollers, the back of Six Flags Discovery Kingdom has some hills to it. The last miscellaneous note is that this park in some areas needs some TLC. Nothing crazy, the park in general does look nice enough, but some repaintings are in order across the park, that's for sure. Alright, now let's talk about operations. Operations is where the best parks succeed and the worst parks fail. Discovery Kingdom lands somewhere in between. The dispatch times themselves aren't awful, but there is a problem at this park with capacity on their rides. This is namely because there aren't enough vehicles on the course. For example, Sidewinder Safari I feel could use 1 or 2 more vehicles, and then on some other rides like Joker, they often run just one train. I would say that maybe in busier periods they run multiple trains, but I was there on one of their busiest days of the year earlier this year in 2024, and they were not running multiple trains on Joker, and in fact to start the day they had one train on Batman. This resulted in 2-hour waits for both attractions. Now, again, I've never seen that park that busy, but still, you gotta run multiple trains on your busiest days. I say this with the utmost respect, but it makes me question how much management cares about guest experience sometimes. Generally speaking, dispatch times have slightly improved over the years, but this park still has a massive problem with ride throughput. If Joker's running one train, think about the amount of coasters at this park that have low capacity. Joker on one train, Superman can only run one train, Batman has 8-person cars. Flash Vertical Velocity, if it happens to be open, can only run one train. Boomerang Coast to Coaster can only run one train. Sidewinder Safari only has 4 people per car, and Con almost always runs one train too, though that almost never has a line. The point I'm making is that from a major thrill coaster standpoint, Medusa is really the only coaster that has decent capacity. This can lead to long lines on busy days, of course, but it can also lead to slow moving lines, and that's almost a bigger problem. There's not a ton that Discovery Kingdom can do about their shuttle coasters because they can only run one train because of the type of ride that they are. But for those rides, and for every ride in the park, I would love to see improved dispatch speeds. All it is to say, the park has grown in some areas, but there's still yet more room to grow. And for the next coaster that Discovery Kingdom adds, I would love to see a high capacity attraction, whether it's for families or for thrill seekers. And at the end of the day, it's new attractions, and specifically new roller coasters, that are pulling new guests into the park's gates. I like the animals, I really do. But I'm not sure how many people are visiting Discovery Kingdom at this point for the animals, outside of school field trips and things of that nature. I think the mindset for most people is to go to the park to ride the rides and the roller coasters, and while they're there, they'll look at some animals. You see this by how crowds disperse at Discovery Kingdom. It's just true that the front of the park is a whole lot more busy than the back of the park. Am I saying Discovery Kingdom should remove their animal exhibits? No, I'm not going to go that far. But I do want to ask the question, which is pulling in more guests, animals or new rides? And so, we'll leave it there. Overall, do I recommend visiting Six Flags Discovery Kingdom in Vallejo, California? Yes, I do. Is this park flawed? 1000%. Is it not as good as it could be? Yeah, I think so. But overall, you can still have a very fun day here, enjoying those animal exhibits, but more importantly, those awesome roller coasters, like Joker. And so, at the end of the day, if you find yourself in Northern California, I think you should give it a shot. So, there are some of my thoughts on Six Flags Discovery Kingdom in Vallejo, California. Let me know what you think of this park down in the comment section below. How does it compare to the other Six Flags parks? Do you think that this park is as good as the other Northern California theme parks? Let me know down below, and I really appreciate you for sticking around and watching this review. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.